The United States, Iran. Two names that have appeared so often in Middle Eastern crises that many people believe they have grown accustomed to the tension. But this time, something feels different. There is no war, yet this is no longer tension in the usual sense. Based on what is currently unfolding, it is clear that the United States and Iran have not entered a full-scale war. There are no sustained airstrikes, no formal declarations of conflict. However, the distance between strategic confrontation and direct military engagement is shrinking in a far less predictable way than before. This is a phase in which a single miscalculation, or a reaction that exceeds expectations, could push the situation into a far more dangerous stage, one that neither side truly desires. What makes the current moment particularly noteworthy is the intensity and frequency of escalation signals. Warnings are appearing more often. Military presence is being displayed more openly, no longer merely symbolic. And just as importantly, regional allies are beginning to act with caution rather than enthusiasm. When actors that once played frontline roles start keeping their distance, it is often a sign that the risks are being taken more seriously. In this context, what is unfolding between the United States and Iran does not resemble a crisis that flares up and quickly cools down. It looks more like a prolonged strategic confrontation, where military power is only one element in a broader framework that includes deterrence, political messaging, and how each side positions itself within the regional order. Every move carries multiple layers of meaning, aimed not only at the adversary, but also at allies, partners, and domestic audiences. Seen this way, it becomes easier to understand why the question of whether war might erupt is being asked more frequently. The United States has made selective adjustments to its military posture, strong enough to signal resolve, yet calibrated to avoid crossing a threshold that would force an immediate response. This form of military and psychological pressure is not new, but in the current environment, it is unfolding under far more sensitive conditions, where the margin for error has narrowed significantly. Iran, for its part, has not chosen silence. Its deterrent rhetoric has been firm, emphasizing that any attack could lead to all-out war. Yet when one looks closely at actual behavior, Tehran appears careful to avoid direct confrontations that would exceed critical thresholds. The messaging is elevated, but actions remain controlled. This suggests an attempt to maintain a fragile balance, firm enough to avoid appearing weak, but restrained enough to prevent sliding into a comprehensive conflict. Within this picture, the Middle East is not merely a backdrop, it is a critical variable. Gulf states, in particular, are showing a tendency to keep their distance, limiting their exposure to direct confrontation. This caution reflects a shared concern. If escalation spirals out of control, it will be extremely difficult to confine the conflict to a bilateral framework. It is precisely this combination, calculated military pressure, strong deterrent rhetoric, and regional restraint, that makes the current phase feel more volatile than usual. Not because the parties are rushing toward war, but because the buffer zone between deterrence and conflict is thinning. This brings forward a more important question. Not who will fire first, but what the United States is actually seeking in this confrontation and what Iran is trying to preserve. To understand where this standoff may be heading, it helps to set aside questions of right and wrong and focus instead on the logic of interests at play. From an analytical standpoint, the United States does not appear to be pursuing a full-scale war with Iran. Such a scenario would entail enormous costs, not only militarily, but politically and economically, at a time when Washington must allocate attention across multiple strategic priorities. In this light, military pressure functions more as a tool than an end in itself. Its apparent purpose is to constrain Iran's regional influence while maintaining deterrence and strategic initiative. Within this framework, any military action, if it occurs, would more likely aim to influence behavior rather than to overthrow or fundamentally reshape the balance of power. One common misunderstanding is to equate all military movements with an intention to wage war. In reality, the display of force is often used to prevent war by raising the perceived costs of escalation. Yet this approach carries inherent risks. When both sides continue tightening the tension, no one can be certain that the line will not eventually snap. Iran faces an equally complex dilemma. Domestically, deterrence is not solely a foreign policy concern. It is deeply tied to political legitimacy at home. A response perceived as overly soft could weaken the government's standing, not only vis-a-vis external rivals, but also among hardline factions within the country. In such an environment, restraint is not necessarily the safer political choice. This helps explain why Iran consistently invokes the prospect of total war, while in practice avoiding actions that would trigger direct conflict. Tehran's strategy appears to be one of avoiding war without appearing afraid of it, seeking to impose caution on its adversary while staying clear of a confrontation it knows would be extraordinarily costly. When these two logics are placed side by side, a familiar paradox emerges. Neither side views a full-scale war as the optimal outcome, yet neither can afford to retreat too far without sacrificing core interests. The result is a state of managed escalation, where tension is continuously elevated but deliberately kept below the point of rupture. Within this state, certain breaks are still functioning. One of the most important is the posture of regional actors. Many Middle Eastern states recognize that if war breaks out, they are unlikely to escape its consequences. Their preference for quiet diplomacy, behind-the-scenes engagement, and avoidance of overt commitments reflects a shared desire to prevent the region from entering another destabilizing cycle. Economic and energy considerations form another constraint. The Middle East remains a critical node in global flows. Any major disruption would generate ripple effects far beyond the immediate theater, affecting actors with no direct stake in the conflict. This is a risk both Washington and Tehran must weigh, even as tensions rise. Still, the existence of these restraints does not mean the danger has been eliminated. On the contrary, the below-threshold phase is often the most perilous, when stability depends on precise calculations and assumptions about the other side's reactions. Even a small deviation, an unexpected incident, a misinterpreted signal can set off an unintended chain of escalation. From this perspective, several potential paths can be envisioned. One is a gradual de-escalation after signals have been sent, facilitated through overt and covert diplomatic channels. Another involves limited clashes designed to release pressure, yet carrying the risk of spiraling beyond control if misjudged. The broadest scenario, though least likely, remains present as a background risk, particularly if a red line is crossed or significant casualties occur. What is striking is that among these possibilities, limited confrontations may be the most dangerous. They create the illusion of control while steadily narrowing the margin for error. History offers many examples of conflicts that slid from managed confrontation into full-scale war, despite the absence of such an intention at the outset. Rather than asking whether war is inevitable, a more practical question may be which restraints remain effective, and which blind spots could lead to miscalculation. In prolonged standoffs, the greatest risks often stem not from clear intentions, but from accumulated errors over time. The United States and Iran now find themselves in such a moment. Not at the point of no return, but no longer buffered by the wide safety margins of the past. In this environment, the key issue is not predicting a specific date for war, but recognizing how quickly the balance could shift if a single variable slips beyond control. We will continue to observe and analyze the evolving dynamics of this confrontation, not to seek drama, but to better understand the logic operating beneath signals that may otherwise appear disconnected.